Following the death of Jack the Ripper's fifth canonical victim, Mary Ann Kelly, police surgeon Thomas Bond mused about who the vicious killer could be. He said, "The murderer must have been a man of physical strength and of great coolness and daring. He is quite likely to be a quiet, inoffensive-looking man, probably middle-aged, and neatly and respectably dressed." That description could have fit most men in London, but Jack the Ripper would have had other attributes as well. The killer must have been someone who knew the area of Whitechapel enough to navigate it in the dark. Indeed, he must have been someone who fit in so well with the locals there that he didn't draw any attention to himself, even at night or in the early morning. And though Jack the Ripper's anatomical knowledge, or lack thereof, has been debated, he must have understood the human body to some degree. He certainly understood it well enough to remove organs from some of his victims, as he did in the murders of Annie Chapman and Catherine Eddowes. And he had the iron nerve needed to disembowel many of the women he killed. That said, the killer left infuriatingly few clues behind. The best clue came from the murder of Eddowes, when police found a scrap of her apron covered with blood and fecal matter. The killer, it seemed, had used the apron to wipe off his knife. There were also several letters allegedly sent from Jack the Ripper to the police, including the Dear Boss letter and the From Hell letter, the latter of which contained part of what appeared to be Eddowes' kidney. But the authenticity of these letters has been frustratingly difficult to establish. So, who was Jack the Ripper? More than a century later, the killer's identity continues to elude investigators. Some theories are outlandish, like that writer Lewis Carroll or even British royal Prince Albert Victor were behind the horrific crimes. Some theories appear to be supported by DNA, as in the case of Polish barber Aaron Kosminski. Then again, theories like these also assume that Jack the Ripper was a man, and not a murderous local woman. Here are some of the most likely and most interesting Jack the Ripper suspects that have emerged since his reign of terror in 1888. We'll discuss who these suspects are and why investigators believe they could have been the notorious killer. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Hardy.
Today, we're going over the many possible Jack the Ripper suspects. It's an interesting turn for us because we spent so much time with the victims through the past 2 months.
Yeah, and I think we maybe mentioned briefly here or there a couple names that we'll be talking about today.
Well, we sort of split this up into, we'll start with the most likely suspects and then move into some wild card ones, because there are some interesting wild card ones, including
Has
H.H.
anyone
Holmes.
Suggested time travel? He was a time traveler. I'll put that one out there.
Did they ever do that on Doctor Who? That seems like a pretty good plot.
I don't know. Did they ever do a Jack the Ripper thing on Doctor Who? I'm going to look that up real quick.
That would fit in so well.
Maybe they didn't want to touch it. No, they've never done a Jack the Ripper episode.
Wow. Well, you heard it here first. It's a good plot.
Yeah. Someone on Reddit asked if they'd ever done Jack the Ripper, and someone said that they think it might be too dark for the show.
The show gets pretty dark sometimes. I mean, I haven't watched it in years, but I remember it dipping into darkness every now and then.
Some of the more recent seasons definitely get heavy with the subject matter.
So anyway, the most likely suspects, just go through this list here. One of the first guys is this man named Montague John Druitt.
Great name.
Great name for a murderer. He's suspected because he was found dead in the Thames on December 31st, 1888, which is around the time that the killing stopped. The last victim was in November of that year. He died by suicide via drowning, and
that's a brutal way to kill yourself.
That is a brutal way. This guy, Druitt, was a favorite suspect of Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melville Macnaghten, which is a great name too.
Also a good name, yeah.
He claimed that Druitt's own family suspected the man of being the Whitechapel murderer, and it was alleged that he was sexually insane.
Now, what does that mean? Sexually insane?
Well, there's an interesting thing about that. These are the reasons why people think he could be a suspect. Here are the reasons why he could not be, or maybe he's not. He's probably a homosexual, which...
Sexually insane.
Right.
Right.
In that day, might have. And he was probably just fired, possibly because of his sexuality, which is maybe why he wanted to die. There was mental illness in his family, and he left a suicide note behind that said something to the effect of, "Since Friday, I felt like I was going to be like Mother, and the best thing for me was to die." Which makes it sound like his suicide was not related to the the killings at all.
Yeah, no expression of like guilt or anything. Just
Yeah, I can't stop myself or whatever.
Yeah.
The police got several like facts about him wrong. His age, his occupation. McNaughton said he was a doctor and he wasn't.
Oh, wow.
And Jack the Ripper generally thought, or some suspect, that he had some medical knowledge.
Right. Also pretty bad at investigation if you can't even get like the basic facts about somebody.
Right. Yeah. Plus, he had an alibi for some of the murders, so he's playing cricket.
Oh man, that's upsetting that he would lose a job possibly over his sexuality. That's like that's a harsh reality.
Yeah, I mean it was 1888, so So anyway, I mean he does come up on lists of Jack the Ripper suspects, but I think mostly because he died and then the killing stopped. But it seems probably
more
unrelated.
Just, coincidental. I think we should start referring to homosexuality as sexual insanity again, though. That's pretty awesome.
Sexual insanity is kind of a cool name for a band.
That is a cool name for a band.
This is actually a really cool name for a band. Came up in an article I wrote a couple weeks ago about something to do with the underworld. The word is psychopomp, and it's creatures that accompany souls to the underworld. And I think it's the coolest name for a band, Psychopomp.
Yeah. A metal band called Psychopomp. That'd be sick.
Back to Jack the Ripper. The next guy, the next suspect is a bit more compelling, I think.
Yes.
Or some people think. It's this guy named Aaron Kosminski. And there's a lot of reasons why he might have been Jack the Ripper. He arrived in England from Poland in the 1880s. He worked in Whitechapel during Ripper murders. He was institutionalized for insanity in the 1890s, so right after the murders, or around the time the murders stopped. At the time, he was considered a suspect, and McNaughton noted that this guy had a great hatred of women, especially the prostitute class, and had strong homicidal tendencies. These are all very compelling reasons on their own.
Right.
And then in more recent years, some have claimed that DNA evidence from Catherine Eddowes' shawl, which our listeners will remember was found at the scene, covered in blood and fecal matter, might link Kosminski to the murders. So
right.
When that came out, it was sort of like, oh, they've identified him, case closed.
Yeah, there was a lot of big, catchy headlines in the news saying like, we got him. Jack the Ripper finally identified.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the thing is like, okay, this shawl, it all hinges on the shawl. And like the shawl was handled by a lot of people. If Eddowes had turned to sex work, which like, again, her friends and family said she didn't. But if she had, it could have had other people's DNA on it. Some people doubt this is her shawl. And the study that claimed this was never peer reviewed. So.
Oh.
Yeah. So those are all reasons.
Yeah, that's pretty telling. Well, they also said the shawl was like really nice. It was like a very good material and something that like basically they don't think Catherine Eddowes would have had the ability to afford it.
She needed money. That was her whole thing is like she was staying in the casual ward because she couldn't even afford a room. So that seems like if the shawl's nice.
Well, they said it was very nice quality and I think it came from Russia, which at the time Poland was maybe not a part of, but like there was like a connection there. And since he was from Poland, they think maybe he just had the shawl at some point. Like he might have purchased it and brought it with him.
I mean, it is compelling, but it is, it's like hard to really be sure about it.
Yeah.
Plus, he wasn't, even if he had homicidal tendencies, he wasn't known to be violent. He had auditory hallucinations and paranoia, but that's different. And then it's possible that the Kosminski that the investigators are talking about was actually somebody else entirely. So, so there's that.
Yeah, not the most uncommon last name.
Kosminski, yeah. The next guy is this guy named Francis Tumblety, I guess so.
Tumblety, yeah.
He was an Irish-American quack doctor with a well-documented hatred of women, which I think a lot of people on this list had.
I was going to say, there's a lot of women hating.
It's a trend, yes. He especially hated prostitutes and may have once been married to one. One witness claimed that he had talked about disemboweling prostitutes, which is, that's Jack the Ripper. He was known to carry surgeon knives, and he left England in November 1888. So, seems a fair suspect. But he left England to avoid other charges, including gross indecency or engaging in homosexuality. And this happened on November 7th. Marianne Kelly was killed on November 9th, which would have been a pretty big risk for him to take.
Yeah.
He was distinctive. He was tall. He had a big mustache. Eyewitnesses probably would have recognized him. So despite his like woman hating and his knives and everything, it again maybe doesn't quite line up as a good suspect.
Yeah. Well, and I think we talked last time too, because I mean, we only really discussed the 5 canonical victims, but we did, there might have been one in early 1889 as well, which we talked about.
Yeah.
Not that, the whole case hinges on that unconfirmed Jack the Ripper murder. But if somebody leaves at the end of 1888 and there's this potential other murder.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. I think a lot of these people are like, well, they're a good suspect because they died or they left and then the killing stopped. But if the killings continued, then they're not really a good suspect at all.
Yeah, so just something to consider.
One last fact about Francis Tumblety is that in the 1860s, he was briefly arrested as a Lincoln assassination conspirator, but then let go. Just weird. We love a Lincoln assassination conspirator. Let's see. So our next guy is this guy named William Bury. He, in February 4th, 1889, strangled his wife and stabbed her with a penknife. So he's homicidal. A week later, he told the police that she had committed suicide and that he'd felt guilty and had hidden the body, but allegedly said that he was also worried he'd be arrested as Jack the Ripper, which is a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little sketch. Police also found graffiti at his house, which said, Jack the Ripper is at the back of this door and Jack the Ripper is in this cellar, but it was probably made by like a kid or something.
Right.
And he lived near Whitechapel, so yeah, could be.
I will say killing his wife it makes him a murderer. Yes. Does not make him
like a serial killer.
Also, like if you murder your wife, it might be more of like a crime of passion kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it's like
versus
it's more
strangers,
personal rather than just going out and killing random women.
Yeah, it makes me think of like Ed Kemper, who I believe like hated his mother, but took out a lot of his rage on hitchhikers and stuff. But then he did eventually kill his mother. So yeah. Anyway, this guy, William Bury, there's really little evidence tying him to the crimes. And he even said in his confession, he admits to killing his wife, but he said he tried to dismember her and was too squeamish. And Jack the Ripper does not seem like a super squeamish character. So
no. Also, whatever. I'm not going to try and question it. I was going to say, he reported his wife's death as a suicide.
It's pretty stupid.
Yeah, that alone is pretty dumb. But also, like, why'd you try and dismember her?
Yeah, I don't think he thought this through very well.
No. Yeah, that kind of weakens the suicide angle a lot.
This next guy, he's actually a pretty good suspect. His name is James Kelly. He was clinically insane. He stabbed his wife to death in 1883 because of a delusion, allegedly, that she was a sex worker who'd given him venereal disease, which he'd probably gotten before his marriage from visiting sex workers.
Great.
He escaped from an asylum in 1888.
Oh, wow.
And he's been tied, allegedly, to murders of American sex workers as well. So he's an option. There's not a lot of like, this is why he couldn't have done this. He's like an option.
Yeah. His story, the escaping from an asylum thing, it's like a campfire story almost.
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of these people I think on this list like spent some time in asylums or I don't know.
Yeah. Men will do anything to avoid going to therapy.
Oh, it is true. These guys could have benefited from therapy probably, including this next guy, whose name is George Chapman, also known as Surin Klazowski. He was hanged for poisoning 3 of his wives. He lived in Whitechapel. 3, yes.
3 of them.
If you're going to do one, I don't think it's all at the same time, no.
That's crazy. They didn't get him after the first one?
I can't remember this woman's name. Every female murderer, I feel like, is called like the Black Widow killer. But there's this murderer we have covered on the site who killed her first husband with Windex. And then did the same thing with her second husband. So, like, if it works the first time and no one catches you, then it ain't broke.
Keep doing it, I guess. Yeah, David ain't broke, don't fix it.
This guy also has surgical training. And again, this is like, is Jack the Ripper a doctor type theory,
right?
But poisoning versus like stabbing and disemboweling and everything, it's a pretty different way of killing someone. I don't see him as like the most compelling suspect on this list.
No, and again, killing your wife's a different ball game, different kind of murder.
These next 2 are better suspects in my opinion. The first one is a guy named Thomas Cream. He was a doctor. His first wife died mysteriously. He was known for performing illegal abortions for women in Chicago, and he was suspected of at least 1 murder and convicted of 2 others. He was hanged for the murder of a prostitute in 1892, and his last words were allegedly, "I am Jack."
Interesting. Weird last words.
Very weird last words.
If you weren't Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
That's so funny. It's not, but like, I think we've talked about last words before in random context.
I feel like we have too. I don't remember why, but he's a compelling suspect, but the timeline is a little wonky, and he was probably in prison in Chicago during these murders. So This last guy on the list of like most likely suspects, this is another weird story. His name is James Maybrick. He's a cotton merchant in the 19th century. And in the 1990s, a couple of objects emerged that seemed to tie him to the murders. The first was a diary that was 9,000 words long. It included confessions to the 5 canonical victims, as well as 2 others, including details that maybe the killer would only know. And it ended with, I give my name that all know of me, so history do tell what love can do to a gentleman born. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper.
Huh.
So that's suspicious.
Yeah.
Around the same time, a watch also emerged inscribed with J. Maybrick and I am Jack and the initials of 5 canonical Ripper victims.
That's got to be fake. That's got to be
well,
fake.
it's really hard to tell because I was reading about like on the Ripper websites and there's just debate over whether these were forgeries. The guy who the diary was apparently found at Maybrick's home.
Yeah, the diary is compelling. The watch is weird because if you're Jack the Ripper and you go to a watchmaker and you're like, yeah, can you inscribe that with my first initial, my last name? Also, can you inscribe I am Jack on it and the names of 5 people who I murdered?
I don't know that he brought it to a professional to do this. He might have just like scratched it in himself.
Maybe. I don't know. That's a really funny idea where the watchmaker's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And like,
that's weird. What a weird request.
Yeah, that's strange. Must be a
fan.
Must be a fan, yeah.
The diary's author never says my name is James Maybrick, so like it's not clearly connected to him, though it was purportedly found in his home. There is controversy over whether or not it was forged, and some think that the 2 items appearing at the same time is like just too coincidental. And but it is weird. And Maybrick was also murdered by his wife, so there's also that. Yeah.
Like maybe she found out and killed him.
Maybe she found out.
Yeah. Again, but if you're going to go through all the effort to kill your husband because he's Jack the Ripper, why not just tell people it was Jack the Ripper then? Put that mystery to rest.
Well, she might have killed him for a different reason. I mean.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You know. So those are like some of the top likely suspects that have appear on like lists and everything.
Yeah. Well, there was that newer one too. But Sarah Baxton Horton, the granddaughter or great granddaughter of a detective who was working on the Jack the Ripper case, said that based on witness testimonies and medical records, she was able to name Jack the Ripper as somebody named Chaim Hyams. He had a history of being violent towards women. He worked near Whitechapel. He was in and out of asylums. He was a cigar maker working in the area. So he at least had some skill with his hands. He was an epileptic and an alcoholic, 35 years old. He had like a very strange gait, which she said some eyewitnesses noted that this person who was seen with prostitutes had a strange gait, but it's all pretty loose speculative evidence. It's, there's no DNA or anything. It's just like it could have been this guy. No one else mentioned him ever.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, a lot of these guys, it's sort of the same story. It's like they were institutionalized, maybe an alcoholic, maybe carried around knives.
I think that's too easy though.
Oh, yeah.
It's too easy of an answer. Like, there was such a stigma around mental health back then. I mean, still kind of is, but like way worse back then. And it's easy to look at somebody who was in an asylum or had a drinking problem and say like, oh, they were the killer because obviously they're a crazy person. But like, I don't know. I think that's just like, it's like too easy of an answer. It's too easy to blame someone who was in an asylum just because they were insane versus like, this was like methodical, like intelligent seeming person behind these. Not that you can't be crazy and smart, but I don't know. It just feels like too methodical to have been someone who was just like in and out of asylums.
Well, let's get into some of the more complicated theories then, shall we?
Let's do it.
This next one is definitely someone who could have been methodical and had power. And that's Prince Albert Victor, who's the grandson of Queen Victoria.
Yep, it was him. I don't trust him.
The theory says that he got a shop girl pregnant, and then a bunch of sex workers found out who had to be eliminated one by the royal family.
Interesting.
And he ties into another suspect named William Gull, who was a physician who treated the royal family, including Queen Victoria. And the theory is that Gull, if not Jack the Ripper himself, knew who it was and was part of
royal
cabal,
conspiracy.
the right word. Yeah, it was him and a bunch of Freemasons who carried out these murders because the women who were killed knew about this illegitimate Catholic heir to the throne sired by Prince Albert Victor. Another theory about Prince Albert Victor is just that he got syphilis from a sex worker and went insane and then just killed a bunch of them.
Does syphilis drive you insane like that?
I think it can if it's untreated.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. There is not a ton of evidence. I mean, I guess there wouldn't be if they did their job well, but there's not a ton of evidence to support this theory. Prince Albert Victor himself was not in London at the time of the murders, and he would probably stand out in Whitechapel.
Yeah, be pretty
Big
noticeable.
Prince.
Yeah. Is this the Prince Albert that the piercing is named after?
What piercing?
Don't look it up if you don't know. It's like when you get a... I want to make sure I'm right on this. Yeah, it's a penis piercing.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the provenance of that is. It could be him.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. There were a lot of Prince Alberts, so there could have been somebody else. It was probably somebody else.
Well,
but fun fact if you didn't know.
Yeah, and you heard it here. That's kind of the biggest, weirdest theory, I think.
Yeah. Well, I see your note here, too, that William Gull was 71 years old at the time.
Yeah, so he was probably not traipsing around Whitechapel murdering people, but
That's
maybe...
ancient for them.
I know.
It's very old for 1888.
He could have been involved within this, group of Freemasons in the royal family. I mean, he doesn't have to do the murders himself. I mean, the idea is maybe he just knew who it was.
Yeah, this one is very conspiratorial.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a hardcore conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good one. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, the royals are up to no good all the time. So
the royals are having a tough go of it lately. It's been the next one is H.H. Holmes we talked about. It just seems he's an American serial killer. He targeted women, but they're just have different MOs and nothing really connects Holmes to Whitechapel. Right. Although some claim that Holmes tried to sell human skeletons in London in the fall of 1888. And he was big on selling skeletons and body parts and stuff. Yeah. But
kind of a bad practice to mutilate them if you're trying to sell them, though.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit his... Again, we talked about it, but it feels like his whole thing is more money.
Yeah, he was like a
else.
shyster more than anything.
The next guy is this guy named Walter Sickert. He was a Victorian painter whose paintings look like the autopsy photos of Jack the Ripper's victims. One painting was called Jack the Ripper's Bedroom, which was a place where Sickert had once stayed. There was claims that he was impotent and had a hatred of women. This is debated. And this theory has been especially pushed by the novelist Patricia Cromwell. So she's a big Walter Sickert.
Interesting.
Yeah. But there's not a lot of evidence about this, and he might have been in France during the murders. So.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it all kind of just comes back to his paintings, which
are weird.
But he had, he had a lot of paintings. People paint weird stuff. Artists are weird. You know what I mean? It's inherent.
Sure, yeah.
It's an inherent part of being an artist. Normal people.
I should say that my mom's an artist, so just...
Well, your mom's weird.
She doesn't do Jack the Ripper paintings though. So this next theory is actually my favorite Jack the Ripper theory, and that it's Jack the Ripper's not a man at all, but a woman named Mary Piercy. I love this. So witnesses or the supporters of this theory, I guess, believe that Jack the Ripper had been able to escape unseen from crime scenes by donning women's clothing. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thought this would make sense because if it was a midwife who was Jack the Ripper, she could walk through Whitechapel in bloody clothing and no one would look at her twice.
Right.
Which is a very Sir Arthur Conan Doyle type theory to have, I think. But makes sense. A midwife would have had the knowledge to remove victims' organs, and Mary Piercy did murder her ex-lover's new wife and baby. Wow. And when the police came, she claimed that the blood in her home was from a nosebleed and killing mice. So she had some... She's a liar, I guess.
She has some issues, yeah. But again, killing her ex-lover's new wife and baby is very spiteful, not
it's different.
Yeah,
it's a little bit different. She also placed a strange ad before she was executed that said, MECP, last wish of MEW, have not betrayed, which some think was a signal to an accomplice.
Interesting.
But just seems weird. But I think that the theory that it was a woman and a midwife is fascinating because...
That is really interesting.
Why she would have been motivated to kill sex workers, I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of the only... I mean... Well, now we're just talking about cool ideas for a novel. if it was a very religious time, so if somebody was very devout and anti-sex work and the wrong wires were crossed in their brain, you could see that as motivation. But again, that's purely speculative and just a thing that's going to go in my notes app and never turn into anything.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting idea. It's so rare that women would be a killer in this way and to kill with a knife and everything. It's very unusual for a female killer. I guess there's not a ton of evidence to support the Jill the Ripper, as they say, theory. Some people say, oh, well, DNA from these stamps on envelopes sent to the police seem to have come from a woman, but that's not really what they say. They're just not conclusive enough to say that it's definitely a man. So.
I mean, I'll say, as somebody who's looked at the Jack the Ripper letters, that is not a woman's handwriting.
I don't know. I have horrible handwriting, and I feel like I could see it.
Maybe.
The final kind of like out there theory is that Lewis Carroll was Jack the Ripper, the writer.
Right.
Apparently, some have claimed that his books have hidden anagrams alluding to Jack the Ripper. There's not a lot of evidence to support it. He seems like a pretty unlikely suspect.
Right. Well, he's too busy doing opium. He was not.
There you go.
And like maybe there are anagrams in his books that allude to Jack the Ripper, but that doesn't.
I think it's probably like the Beatles music. Like if you want to see something within lyrics, you can find it. You just have to be like, I'm looking for this thing.
Yeah, play the record in reverse, and it's a thing about Satan or what. It's like no, it's just
right. Yeah.
You're hearing what you want to hear out of it.
Yeah. So anyway, those are like the top suspects / more unusual suspects. I think it's just impossible to say. I mean, we're not going to solve the case. Although, how cool would it be if we did?
That'd be awesome.
Big reveal. We cracked it. But I mean, it seems likely it's someone who hated sex workers and maybe had, some mental instability and
right.
Yeah. Or was Prince Albert Victor and had a lot of powerful people at his beck and call.
Yeah, that is an interesting theory, but that is like we're jumping through a lot of hoops to get there.
Yeah.
Because like there's just like so many factors to that. It's like not only did the prince get someone pregnant, but a bunch of random sex workers somehow knew about it. And they know exactly, specifically which ones, even though these women never interacted with each other.
That we know of,
right.
I mean, they all lived close to each other. Like, they could have interacted.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Flower and Dean Street kept coming up.
Just feels like if that were the case, you hear more about, like, oh, yeah, and these women were seen together, and they were whispering, and like it's
no, all the witnesses were murdered by the royal family, obviously. So
right.
One theory I wanted to talk about, too, was like during, I think, recording this, it was surprising to me, and I think it was surprising to you, too, is how often it seemed like there were like Jewish witnesses, there was Jewish graffiti, and I think we were both kind of curious about that and where that came from.
Yes.
So I looked into it a little bit. I mean, basically, it seems there's a theory that Jack the Ripper was just anti-Semitic and wanted to trigger some sort of riot against Jewish people. Right. And it's interesting because since 1881, the Jewish population of Whitechapel had grown very quickly as people fled to London, mostly from the East, Russia, Poland, Germany. There were about 50,000 people, Jewish people in Whitechapel in the 1880s. And at first, this was sort of like fine, everyone got along. But as unemployment skyrocketed and housing became more scarce, this might sound familiar to
everybody.
Yeah, the sympathy waned. Letters to local papers called them a pest and a menace to native-born East Enders.
Wow.
This sort of language, again, I mean, doesn't sound unfamiliar, unfortunately.
No, yeah.
In terms of immigration in this country. Then, in the summer of 1888, in July and August, there were several publicized hearings on immigration and how it impacted the economy and the ongoing housing shortage. So this one writer thinks that these hearings inspired Jack the Ripper to target the Jewish community to try to, like, stop immigration.
Mm-hmm. To sow, like, anti-Semitic sentiment amongst people.
Yeah. He was trying to, like, stoke this anti-Semitism.
Right.
And the newspapers were already anti-Semitic, and so they just sort of like bounced off each other, and there was a precedence of like murders in Europe that were committed by like Jewish men against non-Jewish women, and the riots that happened after that. And so like the theory is like he was trying to start that in Whitechapel by killing women. And then, you can kind of see that in some of the coverage, the way that newspapers describe suspects or witnesses describe them as like foreign looking or things like that. Like it's implied. And the graffiti, which like completely confounded us about what that could possibly mean because of all the double negatives. I mean, if he left that behind, that could have been him trying to start something.
Yeah.
If he didn't, it's just indicative of like what already existed in Whitechapel at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very unfortunate commonality throughout a lot of history is anti-Semitism is very rampant and common.
Anti-immigration in general, too.
As well, yeah. Very strange.
Yeah.
Comes up with a lot of conspiracy theories as well. So it's kind of perfect fodder for the Jack the Ripper thing because there are many conspiracy theories about Jack the Ripper. But as someone who talks about conspiracy theories frequently, a lot of them just come back to plain old anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Just like a lot.
I thought it was really interesting. That was a part of the Jack the Ripper case that I did not know anything about. But, I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. Looking at like kind of the big picture of what was going on in Whitechapel and in politics and the economy and everything, like I could see it. The other theory is something that Kit brought up, but it's this idea that these women were not killed for being sex workers, but just because they were easy victims, and that they were killed while sleeping on the street because they couldn't get a bed, which we actually know that a lot of them couldn't get a bed. The first two were turned away from their home or their lodging houses. And Eddowes also left the police station and like stumbled into the night with no money.
The only one who doesn't really fit that is Mary Jane Kelly.
But she was possibly asleep when she was killed.
Right.
So that's like if you look through the Jack the Ripper theories through the lens of like, oh, they were sex workers and he hated sex workers, that's one thing. If they were homeless and easy victims, that's like a whole other, possibly a whole other thing.
Right. Because, we always look at the sex worker theory as like the motivation of like this hatred towards women, and especially women who are seen as promiscuous. But if it's just like, oh, they were sleeping on the street, it's very easy to kill them, then it's like that motivation's totally different. Then it's just like
just
somebody
a violent person who
a violent person who could kill people now.
Well, and then, I mean, it'd probably be very difficult to tell, but if the victim type was a homeless person sleeping on the street, like, were there men who were also killed at the time?
Right. Because, I mean, the actual victim list of Whitechapel murders, when you, like, go to the Wikipedia page or whatever, extends beyond these 5, which we've talked about. Not all of them are linked to Jack the Ripper. There was also just a lot of people dying in Whitechapel at the time.
Yeah.
And,
it's hard to tell, though, because, like, I mean, this theory is interesting, and it's hard to tell if these witnesses that do exist, like what if they were telling the truth or whatever. But like the first victim, someone heard her say something in a backyard, or there were things that were seen and heard, and I don't know. I'm not sure I 100% buy this theory, but it's an interesting one. Look at it in a different way.
Yeah, no, it's for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's all a mystery still. Like, most of what we know about this is all assumptions that people have made based on very loose evidence.
Yeah.
So it's not any more ridiculous than other theories.
Yeah, I think people are just trying to fill in the blank. Why did this happen? Who did it? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have an answer for this, but I think it's interesting to ask why this case has continued to fascinate people more than 100 years later.
Yeah.
And how it relates to, I guess, the fascination with true crime today. I suppose the Jack the Ripper stuff probably has some combination to do with newspapers spreading the case and also the mystery of it. Like, if he had been identified,
I don't think anyone would really care anymore.
Yeah, right.
They were like, oh yeah, it was for sure this guy. I'd be like, cool, that guy was a bad guy. And
it'd be a little footnote in, unless it was the Prince, and then it would probably be a pretty big deal in history.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Huh. I'm exhausted. It's a long series.
It's a draining one too. I mean, it's grisly.
It is grisly. And there's a lot of like photos and autopsy reports and things like that.
Do you have a theory that you lean toward? I know you like the Jill the Ripper theory because it's interesting, but is there one that you actually think is like, that could be it? It makes sense.
I do like the Jill the Ripper theory. I don't know. I mean, on this list we just went through, no one like jumps out. I'm like, yeah. Any of them, like any of those, any of those guys, not any of them, but like a lot of them could have fit. And it's like you said, maybe it's someone totally different who's a bit more meticulous and intelligent.
Could be nobody on this list. Like, these are just the names that they put out there. I think there's a good case to be made for Kosminski, probably more than anyone else. But again, it is very like, do we even know if that shawl was Catherine Eddowes? Like,
the DNA is interesting. Yeah.
But the fact that journal wasn't peer reviewed is also giving me pause on it, because like, get someone else to look it over.
Right. Yeah.
If you're confident in it, get somebody else to look it over. So kind of iffy on that one. I fully do not believe it was James Maybrick. I think that watch thing is ridiculous.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, when I first read the article, I was like, this all sounds really weird. But then they were like, well, this stuff does seem to come from the 19th century.
Right. Well, okay, does the handwriting in his diary look like the letters?
I don't know.
I mean, that would be a pretty big giveaway, too, if it's like completely different writing.
Yeah, but wouldn't you like disguise your handwriting when you're writing a letter to the police confessing of, like maybe you're writing with your left hand or something?
Yeah, but if he's writing in the diary, I'm Jack the Ripper, I don't think he's really worried about like hiding his identity.
I guess so. I don't know. I mean, it's weird. It's just like not confirmed.
His writing's very formal and fancy looking.
It doesn't look like the letter at all.
No, the From Hell letter. I'm not an expert in this at all, but
it's like he's longer letters.
Yeah, the handwriting doesn't look anything the same.
But again, like you wouldn't write with your normal handwriting if you're writing, especially like he can't. Well, I guess he could have like cut out newspaper letters or something, but you want to disguise it a little bit. I'm sure he was, or maybe he's has multiple personalities. I know there's another word for that. I can't remember what it is. But like maybe he just like two different people are kind of coming out and he's...
A little Jekyll and Hyde.
A little bit, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Huh. I mean, these letters are so like bragging. They're like, catch me if you can. Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah. Well, also, and the people are not even sure if they're real.
I was going to say, yeah, there's also that.
Yeah.
I just can't believe like the watch. That's so crazy.
I know,
it's
right?
So funny.
Like who would even do that? Be like... It just seems like what an obvious thing to do.
That's what I mean. Like, that's just so like just on the nose.
Yeah, it is on the nose. I don't know. And like, how would he even, I guess he would have seen their names in newspapers.
Right. Didn't really seem like he would care enough to write their names down.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like like he wasn't like obsessed with them as people.
I mean, yeah, but they could have been like trophies in a way, and then he wanted to record it somehow, or he's working for the royal family and he would just wanted to, note that down. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe it's all of them.
Maybe it's all of them.
Maybe it's every theory. Every theory is true.
I mean, I do think that the connection between these cases is sometimes a little bit nebulous, especially like Mary Jane Kelly. Like, I'm not really sure. Like it was a brutal murder, but it was so different from the other ones in a lot of ways that...
Right. I take issue with the canonical 5 thing.
Yeah. I kind of do too. I kind of do too.
Yeah. I also feel like it does a disservice to like other people who died at the time. Like,
yeah. It was a violent place to live. I mean...
No, I mean, yeah, other than circumstantial stuff, there's really nothing linking all of these murders to one person.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like they were brutal and they were a lot of them disemboweled and stuff, and that seems unusual, but yeah, I don't know.
Like even just looking like Thursday, December 20th, 1888, they found another dead prostitute, but she had been strangled. Another woman in July 1889, Alice Mackenzie. There was that was one we talked about before. There was debate whether or not she was a Ripper victim, but it was very similar. September 1889, they found a woman's torso under a railway arch, and a woman named Frances Coles was murdered in 1891, and her body was found at 2:15 a.m., just moments after she was killed. So that's why it's like a lot of those theories where it's like, oh, this person left London in late 1888. It's like, well, yeah, but there's like debate about whether these other people were killed by the same person or not. And that...
I know without knowing a definitive timeline, definitive victims, it's pretty hard to definitively name the guy.
Right. And that's why I'm like, maybe Kosminski, because I think he wasn't institutionalized until the midway or end of 1889.
Mm-hmm.
So he was still around. Like that timeline lines up a little bit better with things stopping. But like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, maybe someday they'll figure it out, but I can't really imagine how.
Yeah.
Except maybe if there's more DNA or something with the handwriting. I don't know, but...
Right. In the meantime, have fun on your Jack the Ripper tours.
Yes. Someone did email in, a listener named Leanne, who suggested that people check out a book called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which is about the lives of the Ripper victims, which I think sounds really fascinating. Although I might need a bit of a break from Jack the Ripper, but it does sound really interesting. And I like that idea of digging into their lives a bit more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we kind of patted ourselves on the back for doing the exact same thing last time. It was like, well, see, we're better because we talked about the victims, not the killers. So. Shout out to Leanne. Thanks for suggesting the book. It does actually sound very interesting.
It does sound cool. Yeah.
And I also like placing the focus on the people who are hurt by this and not like fetishizing the killer, which is kind of like what it's become. Like, I think people who are like ripperologists, it's almost like you're a little too into this guy.
I was reading a New York magazine and they have like, I don't know if you've seen this in the magazine, but they like the lowbrow and highbrow and like despicable, not despicable. Yeah. And one of them, I don't know what the story is behind this, but it was Jack the Ripper. And it says AI says that Jack the Ripper was hot. And it must be people being like putting Jack the Ripper into AI and AI being here's a hot murderer.
Yeah. It's like the Evan Peters Dahmer effect. It's like, don't cast Evan Peters. He's too pretty.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, I guess that's kind of, that's wow. That's that for this series.
Porky Pig's host.
It's Friday. Yeah.
We finished the Jack the Ripper saga and we've ended up exactly where we started.
Have we?
Clueless.
I mean, I certainly know a lot more about Jack the Ripper now than when we started.
No, same. The first time I ever heard about Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes was in like a big thick book for children that you're supposed to read in the bathroom.
It's so funny.
It was like Captain John's bathroom reader for kids or something weird like that. And I was like, why are these murders in this book?
What else was in the book? Was it like a
random facts.
Wide variety? Huh.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's weird. I couldn't tell you when I first learned of
I don't know why this book has stuck with me. Like why I can.
It's the second time you mentioned it. I think with H.H. Holmes it came up before too.
Because that was where I found out about H.H. Holmes.
Yeah.
What do we have coming down the pipeline?
Coming down the pipeline, I believe next is the Osage murders.
More killing.
Of course, as we've been mentioning, like if you've seen Killers of the Flower Moon, this is the story behind it. From what I've heard, the movie is pretty loyal to the actual story, but I have not seen the movie.
Yeah. It's a Martin Scorsese movie, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, he's pretty good.
Leo
and pretty good with accuracy.
Pretty good. We've got that. We've got Mary Magdalene, History Happy Hour, a Teddy Roosevelt podcast I see on the calendar, which we did talk about that in Slack.
Yeah, I love Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, so got some good stuff coming. We don't have another series yet planned.
We do not.
So if someone has any ideas, feel free to get in touch. Love to hear from listeners. You can either email us, as a couple people have during this series, which has been really cool, podcast@allthisinteresting.com. You can also leave a voicemail at 929-526-3029.
This series especially has been really good for people writing in.
Yeah. It's been cool.
I guess I don't know if it's just because more people are interested in Jack the Ripper or maybe the audience is just growing. It was cool to see, though. I mean, we learned quite a few things from people writing in that we didn't know before.
It was really neat.
Like the thing about
sleep.
Yeah, the sleep schedules and stuff, which I had no idea. It didn't come up in our research because
I know, it's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't looking into like the
Victorian lifestyle.
We were just talking about the people who got killed. So, but it's cool. I like that. I like that people have been writing in and being very kind,
that's true.
No one has written in and been like, hey,
you guys
idiots,
suck.
By the way, this is how people slept. It was like it was like, oh, you guys might not be aware. And I was like, thank you for
it was we were really excited to hear it. It's really fascinating. I always get really excited when kids like, there's been an email. I'm like, yay, can't wait to see what it says.
Yeah, it's like a little present.
Breaks up the day, yeah.
Yeah. And if you if you're listening to this and you're interested in reading some of the more, in-depth details about the Jack the Ripper case or anything else we've talked about recently, you can do that at allthat'sinteresting.com. While you're there, you could also maybe, if you want to, become a member at allthat'sinteresting.com/membership. And you can sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a story at allthat'sinteresting.com/sign up.
Yeah. We're always publishing new stuff every single day. So check us out. Say hello on the site. Leave a review for the podcast. We also love that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We do read those for better or for worse. So
they've kept me up at night before.
Nah. They've been nice lately, though.
No, they've been pretty good.
Yeah. And I guess on social.
History Uncovered podcast over on Instagram, and Real History Uncovered on TikTok for just so yummy, delicious, bite-sized content.
Yeah. I noticed our last TikTok on Mary Jane Kelly has done pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, that one almost immediately. Like, as soon as I put it up, it was like notifications. And I was like, all right.
Yeah, which kind of surprised me because it's a very good TikTok, but there's like some images that are like gruesome, like for murder. It's like, oh.
Every time I put one that gets like a graphic content warning, people are like, oh, I want to know what that is.
I guess that makes sense.
Morbid
human curiosity.
Yeah, but it is kind of funny because it's like, we have these other ones that go up that are a little more lighthearted. People are like, yeah, whatever, get that out of here. It's like, do you want to see a mutilated body? And they're like, absolutely.
Hell yeah, let's do this.
100% I do. So if you want to see the mutilated body of Mary Jane Kelly, check us out on social media.
Yeah, we're everywhere online.
Like to dedicate this episode to my dog, Duke.
Aww.
18 years, good boy.
What a good name for a dog.
It was oh yeah, he was a Duke. He was a Duke for sure.
A Duke.
Rest in peace, buddy. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Till next time.